Good morning, all. My name is Kate Zimmerman. I am the new president and CEO of the United Way of Lancaster County. On behalf of United Way, thanks for being with us today from wherever you're Zooming in. I'm sure a lot of you are at home for the first of our conversations about our community this year. Today's conversation is MLK Day, Shifting the Cultural Climate Through Nonviolence and Peacemaking in Lancaster County. The vision of United Way is an equitable Lancaster County where every individual has an opportunity to succeed and the entire community thrives as a result. So I think this topic is especially important to us as we kick off 2024. And I'm grateful to Isa, Joel, and our CI team for bringing together these incredible leaders on such an important topic. I don't want to take too much time away from them because I know that you're here to learn, much like I am, from their expertise, their lived experience, and their wisdom. So I'm going to kick it over shortly to Willonda. But I just want to also remind you that we'll be having future conversations like this, and we hope you will join us. And if there's a topic you'd ever like us to cover, please don't be afraid to be in touch. So Ms. Willonda McCloud is the president and CEO of the Brightside Opportunity Center. I'm sure many of you know her as a local leader in our community. She's also a member of the United Way Board of Directors, and we are going to let her take control of the panel at this point. Thanks, Willonda.
Thank you, Kate. Good morning, all. Welcome to our conversation on a snowy Tuesday morning. Don't know why it had to snow for our conversation, but at least we can Zoom it. So that made life a little bit easier. I thought about that as I was home this morning. I said, well, I still have to moderate the panel, even if I went into the office. So I might as well go into the office. That's where I am. I'd like to introduce you first to our panelists. We have Isabel Castillo from the YWCA, David Miron from the Lancaster Interfaith Coalition, Blanding Watson, president of the NAACP, and Chris Wenden, the executive director of Advoz. Chris is going to start us off with a presentation, after which we will have a facilitated conversation amongst the panelists. So take it away, Chris.
Willonda, thank you. And thank you to Kate and Joel and the United Way for, just organizing this really interesting opportunity to get together and talk about something that I think is so important. And I think we're really on the cusp of thinking, how are we going to change our society? And so a little bit about me before I get started. If you're anything like me, you love to know about who's actually talking. I am sadly an Eagles fan. Yes, I got to own that one and cry in the corner. I have one wife, 4 kids. I don't want like to get those numbers mixed up. I have all 4 of my kids are adopted here in Lancaster County. If you are watching it, I have an African-American daughter. I have 2 white brothers and a part African-American, part Asian daughter. So we have quite an eclectic mix. I grew up myself in Sydney, Australia. So if I say something funny, blame it on the accent. I usually travel with my wife, who's my translator, but she can't be here today. And I really do enjoy one cup of coffee, but it's an extraordinarily big cup of coffee. So before I get started, I just want to make a recognition that at Advoz, we teach about the idea of being in the mainstream and the margin. And what that really means is recognizing when we are in positions where we hold power and recognizing when we're in positions that don't hold power. And as a white man in leadership, I recognize that I hold a lot of that power in the mainstream. And so what I want to talk about today is some ideas where we can help elevate voices in the mainstream and in the margin so that we're able to benefit from everybody's wisdom and really grow our community. So if you're watching the slides online, you might see that there is a little bit of a musical background, and you might be wondering, why on earth did the strange guy from Australia pick the musical theme for a topic on nonviolence? Well, I grew up as a trumpet player, a horn player, and I loved music. One of my favorite musicians growing up was none other than Satchmo himself, Louis Armstrong. Loved everything that he did. Music alone is great, right? As a trumpet player, the sound of music is phenomenal. But what I came to realize as I grew up was that music in community is even better, right? Musicians, we've always believed that our instrument was the most important, right? My instrument is the most important. The trumpet's the most important. The piano is the most important. But eventually there came a time when most of us realized that musical collaboration shouldn't just be something that was tolerated. It should be something that we're sought. And the idea is that great bands need time to work together. They need the maturity to realize that each of us are going to make errors as we seek to make beautiful music. And we need the patience for each other as we try to learn how to play those songs. And so today I'm going to weave a little bit of a theme in about how music and communication can contribute to nonviolence and peacemaking in our society. Real quick, who is Advoz and what do we do? Advoz has been around for many years. What we essentially do is we work in the field of the easiest way to understand it is in conflict resolution, mediation, and restorative practices. And we work in the idea of upstream and downstream. We want to see prevention of conflict escalating to a point where it becomes interpersonal violence. And so we look at training. We look at this idea that we can increase the capacity of people and organizations to have skills and expectations to be able to prevent damaging conflict and harm from downstream. And we also work in mediation, right? So when that training doesn't work and disputes start to happen, we believe that getting folks together to talk about their challenges is a way that by bringing in a facilitator that they can help conflicted parties share their concerns, hear each other, and develop resolutions together. And when that doesn't work, when there starts to become something that is, as we mentioned earlier, a little bit more violent, we believe in the tenets of restorative practices, right? Restorative justice might be another term you've heard, where we seek to address the harm that has been caused through things like theft, vandalism, assault, by bringing impacted people together to work out a plan for accountability. And so what we do is not just educational, it is also highly practical and healing in the community. And so today I wanted to start off with this really fascinating quote from a gentleman by the name of Marshall Rosenberg. And I don't know if you've read this book or you can even see it. There you go, you can't see it, but it's a fascinating resource called Nonviolent Communication, a language of life. And Marshall makes this comment, and the comment is this, that life alienating communication stems from and supports hierarchical or domination societies, where large populations are controlled by a small number of individuals to those individuals' own benefit. It would be in the interest of kings, czars, nobles, and so forth that the masses be educated in a way that renders them slave-like in mentality. The language of wrongness, should, and have to is perfectly suited for this purpose. The more people are trained to think in terms of moralistic judgments that imply wrongness and badness, the more they are being trained to look outside themselves to outside authorities for the definition of what constitutes right and wrong, good or bad. When we are in contact with our own feelings and needs, we humans no longer make good slaves and underlings. And so I think it's particularly poignant today to take a look at the fact that fear can drive the way that we embark on violence in the way we communicate and violence in the way that we live as a society. Martin Luther King Jr. had this amazing quote. He said, "I'm convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other. And they fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they cannot communicate. And they cannot communicate because they are separated from each other." What a vastly profound comment on a day when we are Zoomed, snow dayed, and all locked in, that we have sadly got to this point where the hate and the fear has been ramped up in our society because we've been alienated from each other. I mean, think about how much the temperature in our society rose throughout the pandemic years, right? Everything seemed to get hotter. Everything seemed to get more isolated. The language of hate, whilst it might have always been simmering under the surface, became something that was much more prevalent than where it had been today. And so I would be amiss if I didn't make a couple of comments about where I think that came from, and also leave you with a couple of tools that we as a society, remembering back to that analogy we spoke about at the start, where we can together agree that we can make some really, really poignant and powerful steps in this work together. And so I wonder, how is it that we got here? If you're old like me, you can tell by my lack of hair. There was a phrase at the dinner table growing up, right? Don't talk about politics and religion when there's company over, right? And so what did we do? We didn't talk about politics and religion when there was folks in our house. And what do you think happened? Well, we can't talk about politics and religion when we're around other people. And in many ways, we trained a generation, we trained a society to not know how to have valuable, insightful, and profound conversations with each other because we were afraid of them. We were afraid of what might that other opinion look like. We were afraid of, is it possible that maybe someone else on the other side of the political spectrum might have a great idea? And so we have got to a place where we lace our communication with judgment. We've never really taken the time to hear. What's that old cliche? God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we do double the listening and half the speaking. And so I think that sadly we have, consciously or unconsciously, decided to value each other based on external observations and judgment. And that's a very difficult place to come back from. And so really the question that we're discussing today is this idea of like, how do we shift the cultural climate? How are we going to move our society to a place where we hold that value up? And one of the things that we discover in the work that we do at Advoz is that really when we learn that different views and opinions should come without judging character, intelligence, or motives of the other person, you can really start to learn a lot, right? I talked at the start about this idea that if you are a voice in the mainstream, don't always seek to hold the position in a conversation. Don't be afraid of those folks on what we call the margins, right? If you are that white man in power in the conversation, learn to make space for those folks who are on the margins of different races, creeds, colors, to share their views, because it's truly in the margins where our society grows. It's not in the mainstream, it's in the margins, it's on the edges where our society will learn to grow. And I think we need to learn to evaluate ideas based on their merits, not on the political position of the individual, right? Do we truly believe that a good idea can come from a Democrat? Do we believe that a good idea can come from a Republican? And I think that's really a place that we have got to, sadly, as a society. And I think there's a final, not a final thing, but one other thing that I want to suggest. If you want to do something on this snow day, try watching the news of the opposite party you support, right? At each point that's shared, before you react, stop and say, huh, that's an interesting point, right? Try it over and over and over again for an entire hour and see how wide you are to argue before you truly listen, right? We are wired to argue and not to digest. So there's an interesting exercise to do if you're snowed in and you don't know what to do. But one tool that I wanted just to kind of talk about today that really I believe that can shift our cultural climate in a way that is so powerful is, as I said before, this idea of nonviolent communication. Now, I do want to say at the outset that this is the way that we are able to embrace this process for a really positive change. Now, it's not going to be something that everybody's going to want to do. But I believe that as the majority of us want to embrace something that changes the cultural climate of our society, and I'll talk a little bit about the power of this later, but I think it's some things that are really powerful. So I think the first step is just learning to observe, right? Verbally observe what's being said. Right? The trick is to do something without making a judgment. And these are the resources that are all available from Marshall Rosenberg. And it's hard to make an observation without making a judgment, right? So I hear you're really passionate about, right? I hear you're really passionate about immigration. I hear you're really passionate about the situation in Palestine. I hear you're really angry about the situation in Palestine. There's no observation being made there. There's no judgment being made there. There's simply an observation. And learn to express the feelings in relation to what is being observed, right? Are we sad? Are they sad? Man, it makes me really sad when I hear your frustration or your anger, right? Again, it's expressing feelings in relation to what's being observed. And again, we're not making judgments. We're just learning to make observations and expressions. And then there might be expressing what needs of ours are connected to the feelings that we just identified, right? I need to understand a little more about why this is so frustrating, right? And again, I will say this is all we're not going to learn how to do this stuff in one time, but these are just some ideas of things that I believe that we can embrace to be better in the way our society embraces this idea of a temperature that has got so high that we don't know where to go. right? The fourth step that Rosenberg talks about is what is a request that we need to enrich our lives, right? What is it that we need in this conversation that we might be having with someone? So wow, you know, I'm struggling to understand this, and I'd like to know more. You see, we have got to a society, I firmly believe, where we think everything is two issues. But is it possible that issues might be the two sides of the one coin? Right? Is it possible that our difference of opinions on immigration might be the two sides of the one coin? Right? That the issue is that there is a need for people to have safety, and that we're talking about two issues on the one coin. Right? But we don't get there until we learn to truly listen, to truly make space for people to talk in a way where we don't rush to making judgments about that person. And so Rosenberg just hits these kind of questions at people, like, what are the concrete actions that affect our well-being, right? How do we feel in relation to what we're observing? What needs, values, desires do we have that create these feelings? And what actions are we going to request in order to enrich our lives? Now, you'll notice that none of these things am I making a judgment about the other person, right? Because that's where we are as a society, right? That idea can't possibly be a good idea because you're a Republican, right? Or all silly ideas come from this network or that network, right? And I wonder if we stopped and said, I'm going to give this person dignity, no matter how crazy, how out of sort their opinion might be. I want to learn what's their why. Why are they so passionately against the issue of human rights? Why are they so anti-immigration? And it's interesting that I think that as we come together more as a community, when we make more space for people to come together, and I want to finish up because I've made too much time, but I want to just make a couple of points. Some of you might be saying, well, people aren't going to want to do this. Yeah, that's right. Not everyone is going to want to join the band. Some people are going to want to go solo, right? But people are going to choose to remain outside. But I believe that if we choose to build a community that plays such a beautiful song, that people are going to ask, why wouldn't I want to be a part of that community? And it may well be that some people are isolated. But I will tell you that it begins with each of us choosing to practice some of these things and grant each other grace when we play the wrong note, when we use the wrong term, when we don't understand the historical meaning of something. I will tell you, as a father with two children of a different race than he is, I have to learn a lot, right? I have to learn a lot. And I'm thankful for the people in my life that grant me patience when I might get some things wrong. And, you know, maybe give that person, you know who that person is, the gift of dignity. Maybe have a beer. And I say a beer because I was going to show you a Heineken commercial. I don't have time, but there's a great Heineken commercial where they bring people of different opinions together, have them build a bar, and then show them what the other person said about something that they believe to be important. And then they say, do you want to have a beer with each other? And they say yes, because they discovered the person before the opinion, right? And maybe we invite that person to join the orchestra of a nonviolent society that embraces communication before violence. They might not want to join. But as one of someone who's been so powerful for me in this journey, Dr. Amber Sessom said to me, you want to call people in, not call them out, and invite them to make a change. And so it's tough work, it's difficult work, and I'm so thankful for all the folks here to share what their experiences are. But I will tell you, you might be surprised by what you find. But I will say it starts with each of us wanting to say, we're going to make some beautiful music together. We'll probably hit some wrong notes along the way. But oh boy, when we get that beautiful music sounding, how can we not want to be a part of it? And so thanks very much, Willonda and Kate, for letting me make some opening comments. And I look forward to muting and hearing some amazing thoughts from my co-panelists.
Thank you, Chris. I took so many notes. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I'm supposed to be paying attention, but I was taking notes. Good things. Have a person, not calling a person out. That is good. I'm going to use that today as soon as I finish this call, as soon as we Okay, so let's start with Isabel. Tell us what you do at the YWCA.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I am the director of the Center for Racial and Gender Equity at YWCA. And our mission at YWCA Lancaster, as well as the 200 plus associations across the country, are dedicated to eliminating racism, empowering women, promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. And we do that through our different programming. I work for the Center for Racial and Gender Equity specifically, and we're working with our community both at the grassroots and grass top levels. Our center provides the Racial Equity Institute trainings to different local organizations, businesses, and communities that want to learn about the ways oppressive systems are showing up in our day-to-day lives and how to interrupt them, either for themselves or the people around them, and I would say most importantly at a systemic level. So we have our Racial Equity Institute, and we also hold space for folks to learn and grow in community with each other through our Dorothy Heights Social Justice Club, our Listen, Learn, and Lead sessions. And we have a racial equity profile action team that meets monthly to try to address some of the inequities that were highlighted in the racial equity profile that was released a little more than a year ago. So yeah, as Chris mentioned, just creating space for folks to come and have a conversation, to get to know each other, and want to highlight our partnership with FNM, who is Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Campus. And it's just a community to create racial healing circles for folks to come and talk about the effects of racism and ways that we can take action collectively. So just to name a few things.
Thank you so much. David, same question. Tell us about the Lancaster Interfaith Coalitions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're a collection of individuals, some of whom represent organizations, Jewish, Islamic, Protestant, Unitarian, Universalist, Latter-day Saints communities, person from the Lancaster Theological Seminary. And we have, let me just read this because it's easier to read it than try to tell you. The Lancaster Interfaith Coalition brings people together who seek a deeper understanding of the diverse experiences of the sacred in Lancaster County and to speak to issues which impact our community. Our goal is to celebrate our unity in the midst of our diversity, while calling the residents of Lancaster County to pursue love, mercy, justice for all creation. We've been in several iterations. This organization has been around for probably 10 or more years. I think our greatest challenges are finding resources to do more work and how to reach out to persons that aren't necessarily on the same page as we are. So we do, I think, some of what Chris had suggested. We do some activities which bring people together into community. We had one year we had a traveling events where we met in the synagogue, in the Islamic Community Center, and a congregation. In each part there was some food and some sharing between individuals as a way of bridging the communities.
Good. Okay. Thank you so much, David. Blanding, tell me about the NAACP and what it does. You're still muted, Blanding.
I haven't had my coffee. Sorry about that. The NAACP is the oldest and the largest civil rights organization in the United States, formed in 1909 here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We are also the oldest civil rights organization, organized in 1923. And we are actually 100 years old. Our mission is to achieve, of course, equity, political rights, and social inclusion by advancing policies and practices that expand human and civil rights, eliminate discrimination, and accelerate the well-being, education, and economic security of Black people and all persons of color. Our theory of change, we are committed to a world without racism, where Black people enjoy equitable opportunities and thriving communities. Our work is rooted in racial equity, civic engagement, supportive policies, and institutions for all marginalized people. Our focused areas are health equity, economics, education, civic engagement, criminal justice, youth engagement. And that is where our work is in. And we commit, and we do this work obviously through protest, litigation. We sit at the table and we meet with people, communities, and so forth to try to obviously bring people together to advance those policies. And we also host a lot of or many town halls in those respective areas around the county and also in the country, the state, and the nation. And that's pretty much where our focus areas are with the NAACP. Are you muted, Willonda?
I muted myself, and I need to unmute myself before I talk
Okay,
again.
you need some coffee
The
too,
Zoom
along
thing
with
is new.
Willonda.
The Zoom thing is new to us, right? We just did this last week. No, this should not be a problem anymore. Thank you, Blanding, for telling us about the NAACP. Chris talked, so I'm not going to harass him again. I'm going to give him a break for a second. Also, if you have questions that you'd like us to talk about, you can put your questions in the chat, and I will be monitoring the chat. And if you have questions, I can ask them for you as well. So I'm going to start with the first question for everybody. I would say, let's see. So if those of us who've gone to the NAACP, not NAACP, Crispus Attucks breakfast yesterday, and with Bakari's questions, where are we now and where are we going? In mind, that stuck with me all night. So all night I kept thinking, okay, how am I weaving this into this conversation? So I'm going to weave it into this conversation. Tell me from your perspective, where are we now? And where do you think we're going? And how can we get there? Loaded question, I know. I'm going to start with David.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, where we are now is I think at an important juncture place where we have decisions to make that will affect our future pretty significantly. In terms of what we can do, I think from a faith community perspective, I think the role that we can play in this is for the different faith communities to decide to accept the role of both reflecting on our own behavior and way we operate, as well as mirroring back to the community what we see, and helping to bring together people in different ways and roles. I keep thinking it would be great to do exactly what Chris was suggesting, was to bring a band together, you get people to play together, you get people to know each other before we start to worry too much about our differences. My own sense is that, and based on my studies, I teach 2 classes in comparative religion at Elizabethtown College, and what I've seen is that the heart of each religious tradition is pretty much the same. The desire to connect to one another. How we go about doing it is different, obviously, but that desire for connection and a realization of oneness. And I think the challenge that faith communities have is, especially in Lancaster, I believe, is to acknowledge that oneness and then to act on it and to find ways to embody it, embrace it, and model it for those around us, as well as to reach out and do that bringing in, even as we mirror and reflect what's going on out there.
Thank you. Isabel, I know I said I wasn't going to throw you a curveball, Isabel, but I thought this one was an easy one.
Yeah, I guess just to add to David, continuing to bring people together, to hear each other's stories, and also to learn about the issues that we face here in our community. So I think I mentioned the racial equity profile, and that is a baseline study that tells us where we are as a county, not just here in the city, but also in the county. And we have a lot of work to do. The report shows that if you are BIPOC, especially a Black person in Lancaster County, you live 5 years less than your white counterparts. If you are a person of color, you are paid less even with the same education level as your white counterparts, you're being paid less. Our communities of color are rent burden at disproportionate numbers, which means that they pay more than 30% of their income just on rent. So another one that's very alarming is the youth poverty. It's 9% of our children, our white children, live in poverty, and 34 to 35% of our Latinx and Black children live in poverty. So addressing these inequities is very important, and we need everyone in the community to take action and to learn about these issues and just be involved. So I would say that's where we need to go.
Thank you, Isabel. Landy.
When I just adding on and think about what you're saying, obviously everyone knows we still continue with systemic racism in the nation, the civil discourse, and we need to absolutely sit down and have discussion and talk about why racism shouldn't exist. So we need to come together and be intentional in having those conversations so that we can make effective change. Obviously, there are challenges. I think about what the national NAACP says. When we talk about race and justice, we're talking about the ways that discrimination, even in policing, prosecution, and incarceration practices impact Black communities. Our criminal justice system is shaped by biased policing and unfair judicial precedents rooted in anti-Blackness and racial disparities. The emotional, mental, physical impacts in our communities are tangible experiences for millions of Black people in the U.S. and, of course, in disproportionate communities, even in Lancaster. So we need to, just get together with our policymakers and our communities so that we can come together and obviously make those changes. It's no mistake that, Black people are incarcerated more than 5 times rates of whites. 65% of Black adults have felt targeted because of the race. Similarly, approximately 35% of Latino and Asian adults have felt targeted because of the race. And then, of course,
I get that, and we all have those wonderful statistics that we know them. Give me some forethought on where we can go with those types of things. Because we know those historical markers, which we hate. But I think where we go and where can we go from here?
Well, taking action. Obviously, like you said, we know the data, we have all of that, but I think people just need to obviously reflect on what we have and do something about it. And we need to be accountable and going in that direction to do those things. That's what I think.
Okay, thanks, Landy. Chris.
Yeah, I think it's they are really tough statistics to hear. And I wanted, my answer is reflecting on a conversation that I had with one of our leaders the other day, who was telling me about the decline in the birth population in the United States, and said, we have a birth population decline, which if we're addressing that by being a little bit more sensitive about the need that we need migrants, right? So I didn't even know we had a birth decline in the United States. And so what it shook me up to realize was that there is so much I don't know that shapes how I go, right? And I just made that little phrase up right there. But and I think that's why, we talk about communication, because there is lots of what Isabella and Blanding just shared that I don't know. And it becomes unstomachable when I do know it, right? And that's why I talked about that band idea, and those of us who are in the mainstream to say, let's use all our positions to do it. And so it is, for instance, it's going to schools like Advoz is doing, and working with the SROs to say, how do we get in front of these citations? And so I think what it really comes down to is, for me, people might say, well, talk is cheap, but in a sense, yes, it's cheap, but it also educates where I don't know what I need to change. And I will never forget what an African-American attorney said to me when I was reaching out to him during the George Floyd murder situation. And I said, I don't know what to do. I'm head of an organization that is largely white, and we serve 66% non-white people. And he made this phrase to me, Willonda. He said, you're late to the party, but at least you're at the party. And that to me was the most profound phrase, because he welcomed me in
Mhm.
to say, thanks for being here, and let's figure out how we use the power for change. And that's why I really embraced it. And so I think that really for me is saying to everybody in our community, yeah, you might not know these stats. Don't be ashamed that you don't. Then
Mhm.
figure out in your little world on your instrument, how do you play your instrument better? And don't try to tackle all the big problems, because I can't change all the big problems, but I can certainly help in my backyard, right? I can help with kids in my kids' schools. I can help those things. And I think really that's where, like, I don't believe that talk is cheap. I believe that talk helps us to understand what we don't know, to change what we can change. And I think that's really, for me, a powerful tool, because just even listening to Blanding and Isabel, it's some things I wasn't even aware of. But now I know areas that I need to figure out, how do I use my power and my influence to make changes for the better.
So it sounds like we start individually first, right? I think at what Michael Jackson said, let's start with the man in the mirror. Yeah, I used to not get that when I was younger, singing song, like, all the words and things. And then it hit me one day as I got older. I'm looking at myself. Okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. Took
Well,
me a
and
minute to figure that out.
And may I add, is starting with ourselves, but also within our own organizations and agencies, right? People here in this panel can make important decisions that affects their employees and people listening in the panel. So when we've presented the racial equity profile, we've had people who, are really good or thought they're very good at equity. They believe in this and they think it's important. And when they went back to their HR person and said, hey, can you run the numbers and see where we are at with our employees, our Black, Latinx, BIPOC employees and white employees, in terms of, are we paying everyone equitably? And the numbers came back reflected as the way it's shown in the racial equity profile, where, people were not being paid the same, even for the same education level. So individually, but also you can start with your own organizations as well.
Oh, Isabel, I'm so glad you said that. I was thinking the exact same thing. Yeah, oftentimes, I mean, I run a Brightside Opportunity Center. We are largely an organization of pretty much all race and genders here. So when I read the racial equity profile, I was amazed myself. So I automatically gave it to my board, and one of my board members was quite surprised that Lancaster County was what it was. And I was thinking to myself, I wasn't surprised at like all of the things, but I was surprised at some of the things. So yeah, a great place to get started if you are a nonprofit running a board or on a couple boards or on a board period, to actually bring that report to a board meeting to ask for a discussion. Yeah, that was quite impactful for us. I'll go with my next question. Let's see. How can communities engage in promoting equity and nonviolence at a local level? So we talked about, Wenden gave us some national statistics, and locally we have the equity report. So some of you talked about what you do as an organization. Is there anything else we can add in those spaces to get us moving past, or at least talking about this discussion or these inequities that seem to be in every community?
I think
I'll
it's
start with I'll let you start. I'm not going to pick.
okay. I think it's important to pay attention to what Chris shared with, I think it was Mr. Rosenberg, when he talked about persons in power and their interest in remaining in power. I think we have to recognize that the systems that we have in place are ones which tend to promote the idea of one individual at the top of everything, and to recognize that that's probably as much a source of the difficulties we have as anything else there is. And so we need to learn to model a shared leadership perspectives, even if we don't have the opportunity to change the system to say there's more than one president. The person who serves in that office can act differently than somebody who is just doing it on their own. It can bring other people into the mix. And I think, to me, that's at the foundation level of what this is. And if we don't do some steps to address that, everything else is going to be that much more difficult to address. And I know it's not easy, but to me, that's one of the things the faith organizations have the capability and the tools within them to do if they have the willingness to do it. But even faith organizations oftentimes are the ones that promote the very inequities that we're dealing with and talking about. And so it's a real challenge, I think, but it's one I think we can address if we have a mind to recognize that, all right, so you have one pastor, but perhaps that pastor should bring around his or herself a group of people to share and make sure there are people from different genders, different backgrounds, that kind of thing. And that begins to model what it looks like to have persons in shared leadership rather than thinking we have one person at the top who makes all the decisions.
Yeah.
I think
Thank
for
you,
me,
Dave.
great question, Willonda, and I appreciate, David, your comments. I think giving us grace to fail, right? We're not going to get things right. And largely there's been a massive lack of education on some of these issues that Blanding and Isabel shared. That I think there are enough of us, and I say us meaning white men in power who want to make these changes, but there's so much we don't know, right? And it is very, very we might try and make this change, or we might fail, or we might make that change and not fail, and that's why I harped back to that comment made by that colleague of mine, was at least you're at the party, right? That gave me permission to feel like if I try something with the heart and the desire to want to address some of these issues and it doesn't work, how many times did some of the great inventors try things before it failed? And so I think, like, as a society, embracing, we might not get everything right first go, but that's no reason to not try doing something. So I think that for me would be something, as I said, I'm not going to get everything right. I don't necessarily have those arm lengths in various avenues of power to do it, but I want to try and figure out what I can do. So I think also microcosming the opportunities to make some changes.
Thanks, Chris. Blanding?
Think about, like the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, don't raise your voice, improve your argument. The benefits of nonviolence and choices and lifestyles and practices are numerous. The primary benefit is that society gets to live in physical safety. This allows us to be more creative in conflict in our resolution, peacemaking, and peaceful keeping. Most importantly, individuals get to live a quality life for another day. And obviously, taking our organizations and using that space and the power within our organizations to make those effective changes is, I think, a way for us to do that, and taking those practical steps, obviously, and remembering, those things in Dr. King's vision and work and his leadership, first and foremost. And when I think about everyday life in our beloved community of Lancaster, we all should have commitment to nonviolence and should have those principles to call for our loves of our neighbors and ourselves. So that's what I'm thinking about on, adding on what Chris is saying.
Yeah, thank you, Blanding. Isabel?
Yeah, definitely shameless plug. Join us. We meet every third Thursday with the Racial Equity Profile Action Team to try to come together and find solutions to these inequities. So at the YWCA every third Thursday at 6 o'clock. And most importantly, just find what you are passionate about, what fires you up. There are so many issues that we need to work on, and it can feel daunting. But if there's one thing that you're really passionate, find an organization that works around that. There are many organizations represented here. There's others in the community, like Patients Are Waiting and the Bail Reform Group. So just take action. Don't stand on the sidelines. And just take one step at a time. And again, like I said, find something that you really care about and start there.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. So as you guys were talking, I love that grace to fail. We don't do that in society today. We are so quick to jump on my kids with cancel culture. My daughter told me, and I was like, what is that? What is that? I guess when we failed when we were younger, I'm old. We didn't have social media to put us out there, call us out, and all those kinds of things. And I think I said to her, as a aged person, I won't call myself old. Sometimes I really don't care what you think about me. I really don't get into that space. You have to allow people to make mistakes. And it seems in the society right now, we are really challenged when people make a mistake. The first thing we want to do is call them out. So I'm with you, Chris, on you're in the space now. What are we going to do now that we're in the space making these decisions in our organizations and our families and our homes and all those things? You are not going to get it right at all times. And as you said, being of the majority culture, I think of it in a whole different way. For me, being a female in leadership and an African-American female in leadership, I don't always get it right. But sometimes I get it very wrong. But give me the opportunity, to do better and to get better and to grow. So as people, I think as a society, we need to, and the little characters, TikTok characters or whatever those Twitter characters, I'm so bad at, I don't tweet, as you can tell. Within the time frame, it just doesn't work anymore. Those sound bites are very ineffective. So that's just I'm gonna get off my soapbox and back to moderation. Okay. So can any of you share some successful peacemaking efforts? You shared some of them that happen within our county. So we talked about meals. We talked about having meetings. Is there anything else as a community that we can do now or in the future? Just sounding board of ideas that we can do to create this peaceful community that we all want and need. Who's going to start? I'll let you start. I'm not going to pick this time either.
I'll go ahead and start. One of the things that we train folks at Advoz about, and I feel like I'm just not doing this, is like, we talked about going back to our communities and our places, and Isabel did a great example there. But one of the ways is just thinking about, where am I mainstream and margin, right? Where am I in a position that I have that power and I am able to make changes? Right. And it may be like not every white person is in the mainstream, and not every person of color is in the margin. And so that's like thinking about, where am I in positions where I can make change? And if I know where I am, what change should I be making? Right. That's the part for me, that it's doing a self-analysis and asking yourself, where can you make those changes?
Yep.
Thank you.
I think also too, our goal should be there in our community. Obviously, we should all have that to build in our community, and each of us committing to do like what we're doing today, having conversations around how to advance equity and civil rights. Another thing is to participate, obviously, in many King Day events or racial equity events that we have in Lancaster and other places, and even national days of like healing. The other thing is to, obviously, we know that there's unequal access, have been around for generations. There still continue to be false narratives that continue to perpetuate time and time again. But I think, us, just taking the time out individually, and like I mentioned earlier, just sitting at the table and trying to work through whatever it is that we have to make those necessary changes, and not have, I think sometimes it's intentional amnesia when it comes around racism. And then, of course, false narratives that are perpetuated that create a lot of the problems that we have, that create discrimination and some of the systemic things that we all experience. But I think just coming together and talking and figuring out ways to, address those issues and come up with some conflict resolution with many innovative ideals that each of us may possess, or experiences or things that we have.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else want to contribute? What can we do within our own? Listen, I forgot the question my own self. I was answering the chat. Listen,
I almost got caught up.
I listen, I'm trying to do a couple things, and I'm like, wait, what was the question? I forgot. I don't know what question it was, and I didn't check the answer. Okay. Well, we'll just ask another question. We'll just come along. Don't worry. So we had a question from the chat. When do we get a chat that has like multiple levels of chatting? I know Zoom is new, but I don't remember seeing that one. But Jill asked, I'd love to hear how each organization represented centering and monitoring transparency as they work for transformative change.
That is a deep question. I
That
will
is a
let
deep
somebody
question.
else start. I guess I could just chime in to what I said. Transformative change and being transparent, like I mentioned, is starting to look inward and say, like, where do we need to work? Where do we need to improve? So yeah, just having a clear, honest conversation within our own organizations.
Good. Thank you, Isabel.
Yeah, I think for us, a couple of things. We brought on a mantra that says the best idea wins in our organization, where we eliminate seniority or job title or power around discussions of that nature. And then also one of the things we just started to do was eliminating college necessities in job advertisements, right? Realizing that doesn't always be the determiner of an ideal candidate, and that's also can also be a very inequitable question. And so you might be missing out on some great candidates. And I just think being open to, as I said before, those voices in your organization who might not have that opportunity to share much, and really elevating them and inviting them to use their their brilliance and their wisdom that they might be holding back, like a light under a table. So
Yes, love that, Chris. Thank you, David.
Yeah, from the faith community perspective, I see two things. One is what I mentioned earlier, is just having times when you share with one another, when you bring people together, when you host an event at a synagogue, a church, a mosque, a different place, and have a time of sharing. We've had two conversations at our church where we invited a rabbi and a representative from the Islamic community just to share a conversation. It wasn't to get into a dialogue or discussion. It was just to hear what it's like to live in Lancaster County as a person from this community. And we want to do more of those kinds of things. The other thing is, I think, for organizations to kind of keep the vision of the beloved community in front of us and to remind us about it, not obnoxiously, but in ways that just keep it there and keep us focused on that, because it's so easy for us to forget, to get, what's the word I want? Complacent. It's easy for us to not allow ourselves to be challenged. So to realize in faith communities in particular, a lot of times I think people come to a faith community wanting to be comforted. And while providing comfort is an important aspect of it, I think probably as much important is the challenge to move out of our comfort zones, to reach out to others in ways that are consistent with what we say we believe about our traditions and our way of being in the world, and building on this oneness and connectedness.
Yeah, thank you, David. Well, since time is winding down, that was the quickest hour ever. I'm going to ask for your final thoughts that you'd like to contribute to the conversation. If you'd like to put anything, I'll try to find whatever links you give me in the chat, if I can find them. If not, if you stick them in the chat, that'd be great. The equity profile is there already listed in the chat. So thank you, Isa, for posting that. So who wants to go first? Final thoughts.
I can start. I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. Want to thank United Way and you, Willonda, for facilitating this discussion. So I guess just reminding folks that this is a generations long struggle, and people are not inherently going to agree with us. I believe Dr. King had a 50% approval rating with the American public when he was assassinated. And so he also reminded us that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. So this is a great quote, and just remembering that it takes conscious and persistent effort to bend that arc. So continuing to be involved, to keep asking questions. I saw an article recently about unemployment rates are low in Lancaster, but there was no breakup of race data. And so just asking those questions And yeah, continue to be involved, register to vote. If you've changed address, update your address. So be involved civically. I think it's very important. And yes, let's continue these conversations. I think they're very important and needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Landing.
Just wanted to thank United Way and also you, Willonda, for hosting today. I think it's obviously we have to continue these conversations because nothing's really going to change unless we, be intentional about talking about these things, and then also finding ways to be accountable as well. Because without accountability, nothing ever changes either. And I think just getting involved and learning about a lot of the community organizations as well in Lancaster, where you can volunteer and help to make effective change within our community in multiple areas of education, criminal justice, economics, and the list goes on. Those are my thoughts. And what I want to reflect on, and also to continue to be involved. This is Martin Luther King Day, right? To get involved and learn more about what King's legacy was, and also what Black history is about as well.
Thank you, Landing. David.
Well, I also am thankful for the opportunity to be together and to hear from each of you. The thought that struck me was that perhaps we all, both the faith community people and as well as different organizations, can kind of form a grounding presence in our communities with all the changes going on, with the uncertainty that people feel, with some of the different things that are happening in our world that make me feel afraid, fearful, wondering what's going to happen. To know that there's a community that we can be together to provide a source of grounding and perhaps hope, maybe is one of the things that we can do in addition to all of the details that we're talking about.
Thank you, David. Chris.
Yeah, I think it's fitting that I don't use my words to finish, that I use that quote that I shared. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I'm convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other. And they fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they cannot communicate. And they cannot communicate because they are separated from each other." And so I think for me, the parting word is let's lean in rather than lean out.
Yes, thank you, Chris. This was a great conversation. And what I quickly discovered was there are many chats going on that I cannot see. So sorry for if all the chats are going on. For some reason, I can't see chats. I see just our things on our side. So I don't know, this new Zoom, apparently it is new. And that wasn't a thing before we got into this life. I don't care what everybody says. I don't know where these chats came from, but sorry that we couldn't address all of the things in the chat. But thank the panelists for actually agreeing to have this conversation. Isabel reminded me, I can see Isabel. Isabel's response, that is National Day of Racial Healing. So perfect time to have this conversation. Thank you guys again on behalf of United Way and myself. I've given you only 2 Willonda thoughts. I'm not going to give you any more. But my third and parting thought is talk about this all year long. We focus on this, of course, MLK Day and Black History Month, and then the other 10 months out of the year, what are we doing? I don't know. So as an organization, as for all of us, and that's me included, keep this at the forefront because I think this is the important stuff and where the work needs to happen. So thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your snowy Tuesday and have a great rest of your day.